Bine v-am găsit! Violența nu educă. Abuzul și neglijarea copiilor continuă însă să fie două subiecte sensibile ale agendei publice, iar agresivitatea în cadrul familiei îndreptată către adulți este în continuare un subiect tabu. Există mai multe tipuri de abuz care pot afecta o familie, iar astăzi urmează să discutăm despre toate aceste forme, îndreptate atât către copii cât și către ceilalți membri. Invitatul nostru de azi este Dr. Ron Frey, de la Facultatea de Psihologie și Consiliere, Universitatea Tehnică din Queensland, Australia, un specialist care are o vastă experiență practică în acest domeniu și care predă profesioniștilor din întreaga lume pe aceste tematici atât de sensibile. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, we're so glad to have you. What we try to do with this show is to raise awareness regarding some sensitive topics, and family violence is one of them. So we are happy to have you here. But first of all, I think we have to conceptualize what family violence means, because being such a taboo subject, I think we have to know that we don't only speak about physical abuse.
Yes, that's right. Most people do tend to think of physical abuse first, including police officers and people who have to respond to incidents of family violence. But the view today is to actually look at family violence as a pattern. And it's a pattern of consistent disrespect of one partner by another partner. So it can often not be violent at all, but a partner who's constantly insulting his partner, putting her down, criticizing her, these sorts of things. That's really as much likely to be family violence as actually hitting a person and that sort of thing, although people are still, women particularly, are still often hit, often injured, sometimes even killed. So I don't want to play down the physical aspect. That's very important, but it generally extends further than that. And it's really important that people be aware of that in the community, that women can live in great fear of their husbands, even though their husbands never actually physically harm them at all. Often there's an implied threat that they could, but the actual incidents can be rare to even non-existent, and yet the person can still be in a situation of family violence.
So we are talking about emotional abuse.
We are. Emotional abuse, sometimes it's called psychological abuse, verbal abuse, control of the finances, sabotaging the partner's chances of work and of career advancement, not allowing your partner, for example, to go to university or do further studies to better themselves, trying to control where and how your partner worships. It takes all sorts of different forms.
Thinking about Romania and what you say, I think many of us won't think that this is abuse.
No, I agree with you, and Australia is the same. It's difficult to. It's been very difficult to shift the public to a broader definition of family violence. Most people think it's hitting, and as long as I'm not hitting my partner, I can degrade her in many other ways without necessarily committing family violence. But what we're asking people to think about is the attitude that they bring into the relationship. Do you respect the person that you're living with? Do you love the person you're living with? Do you treat them like a human being? Do you respect their ideas, their wishes, their thoughts, these sorts of things? And so we're trying to switch it from violence, from physical violence and harm, to disrespect, because we believe the disrespect has an emotional impact on that person, particularly if you are living with someone for many, many years, that can be just as corrosive, maybe more so, than physical violence. Many women say they'd rather be hit than degraded continually.
So we don't think that this is abuse, but after that we don't talk about it. It's a taboo.
No, and therefore we don't even have an idea of how often family violence occurs. When they do surveys, victim surveys, and this is done in a number of countries. In Australia, the Australian Bureau of Statistics does it, and they actually ask people using, I guess, a fairly broad but still fairly conservative definition of family violence. 1 in 3 women say that describes their relationship. So I think we have a lot of education to do, particularly with young people, about what a healthy relationship actually looks like, because it seems like a lot of people aren't living in those.
So you talked about women and children that are abused.
Yes.
Can it be the other way around?
Yes, almost certainly it can. And there the taboo is even deeper, because men are very reluctant to admit that they're being harmed by their partners, because, at least if they're in heterosexual relationships, because they feel embarrassed that as a man they're allowing this to occur. And there's also cross abuse. There's also couples that really put each other in constant danger, where both are violent. So it's not restricted, and for that matter, in homosexual relationships, gay relationships, abuse is also quite common. So unfortunately, it's a general attitude that people take towards their partners. It's not a it's not unique to a gender. Men tend to do it more than women, because men are often educated with the idea that we have certain rights to, services and supports and these things from women, so we're more likely to do it, but it doesn't mean that we are the exclusive gender of abusers. And
if you say that men are more likely to be abusers, I tend to think that women allow. Can we use this word allow?
Allow it.
It's not about allowing, but it's accepting easily.
Accepting, perhaps, but I think allowing is probably too strong a word. Women, anyone who is in a situation where there is violence can put up with it for any number of reasons. And the first reason, and the one that we never talk about, is the fact that they love their partner. They care about the person, and often they know where the violence is coming from. They have lived with their partner long enough. They know that they were mistreated perhaps in childhood, all of these things. So they make a lot of exceptions for their partner. People are committed to marriage and to the idea that a relationship needs to work out. And so there's a reluctance to say, I'm not staying in a relationship where I'm being harmed. There are religious strictures that encourage this. Often family do not support a person who wants to leave. If they go to their clergy for support, the clergy may say the duty of a Christian wife is to stay there and support your husband. Yes. In Australia, we've done a lot of work in the churches to try and help them modify that message, because clearly it's not a Christian relationship where there's violence and disrespect and a lack of love. And then there's the other side, which is fear. A lot of women, for example, if you've been deprived of the opportunity to work, then you may not have the resources to leave. If you know even where to go, and in Australia, for example, we would have women's shelters and this sort of thing, but they're often full. In Queensland, where I formerly lived until last year, they're almost always full. And we would have to put women in hotels and this sort of thing. And it's very lonely to go to a hotel with your children and think, well, what next? So there's that experience of, where do I go? Who will support me? How will I be able to support my children? What if he takes me to court and tries to take my children from me? And then there's also the fact that women are actually statistically in greatest danger when they're leaving, or just after they've left. Many of the homicides we've had in Australia, and in Australia, 1 woman a week about is killed somewhere in the country due to domestic violence. And sometimes the children are killed as well. Sometimes her new partner is killed. And in those sort of situations, she actually has to weigh up safety. And some women opt to stay because it actually is safer to stay.
Yes,
it's horrible.
It's easier to tolerate that.
Yes. And some women would say, well, it only happens, he only really physically harms me once every few years. These sorts of things. A lot of it is, if you put people in a position where they haven't had the opportunities, the same set of opportunities, it hasn't been equal to what the male has had, then they are at a disadvantage when it comes to leaving. It's sort of like having to rebuild your life entirely. You wonder what your friends will think, these sorts of things. You may never have mentioned it to your friends because you are quite ashamed of what's happening. That's part of it. Now, another part is the fact that people who are in family violence become very confused about what's actually happening. So usually the violence is blamed on them. I'm hitting you because you're really bad. You did this really badly. And people start believing it.
You shouldn't do it.
Yes,
That's
yes,
why I
yes.
do
You
it because
burnt the dinner.
Yes.
You got the wrong socks. We actually had a case where someone had the wrong socks, and that was seen as an excuse for abuse. But after a while, that starts seeming plausible. Maybe I do talk too much. Maybe I do burn the dinner. Maybe I'm not a good mother. I'm not a good parent.
They start to believe it.
They start to
assume.
Yes. Yes, we start to believe this is the case of any kind of oppression. The most diabolical thing is the oppressed group starts to believe what's being said about them. And
they feel guilty and maybe they feel shame.
Yes, yes, and they start thinking, well, maybe it is my fault.
And I deserve to be punished.
Yeah, and then they have to make all these huge decisions about, okay, where do I go? How do I leave? How do I mount a court case to keep my children? How do I do all of these things? How do I keep the children in the same school? Is that safe? Is he going to follow me to the school? This happened in Australia a while ago where someone followed his wife, found his wife at school, and then followed her in the car and actually killed her. These sorts of things, you have to make all of these decisions when you are least capable of doing it. It's sort of like maybe your viewers will have, if they've ever lost someone's died, and suddenly you're being asked, what kind of music do you want at the funeral? And all these sorts of decisions. It's quite overwhelming to have to make those decisions at that point in your life. This is very similar. And so there's also the confusion about, whose fault is it and how will this be seen publicly, and all of these different things that actually inhibits people's ability to make good decisions at that point. So there's a lot of reasons why people stay in family violence. And I actually say to my students, because for some reason everyone thinks that the first thing that you would do if someone hit you is you would leave. You'd say, no, that's it, we're not ever doing this again. I actually ask them, imagine that your partner did that. Would you actually leave? And I know I wouldn't. And I just can't imagine many people would do that the first time. People would be thinking about it and would think, okay, well, maybe the next time he does it. Oh, well, I can kind of understand it. Maybe the next time, and that sort of thing.
And how many chances?
Yes, yeah, how many chances? Do you forgive 7 times 70 or, that sort of thing. It becomes really, really difficult. So my question when I'm asked about why doesn't she leave, I actually think we've got the question wrong. It's why does she leave? The pressures from all angles to stay are so much greater than any particular pressure to leave.
Can we think at some characteristics of a person that is an abuser? Yes,
there are some that women need to be careful about. And these, I always say this to my students, because they're often, as university students, they're often forming their very first relationships. Actually, by the time they get to university, they probably had at least one. But there are signs to look for that are really, really important. And unfortunately, a lot of those are also signs of romance. So the man who actually tries to sweep you off your feet, who says to you in a Quaker Oats style, nothing is better for thee than me. That sort of person.
I'm your chance to be happy.
Oh, be careful. When someone says that, that's the most dangerous situation. Someone who finds that all of your friends and family are objectionable. He finds a reason to dislike. I mean, I think it's reasonable to dislike some of your partner's friends, and family is probably even more normal. But all of them? If he says, well, I just want all of your time. People who appear obsessed with you. So someone who calls continually, someone who doesn't give you any space. And of course, in the early stages of romance, you often don't want that anyway. But someone who is constantly demanding all of your time. These are big warning signs. Any violence while you're dating.
And can we think about a portrait of the abused person?
Sorry?
Some characteristics of the abused person?
Well, they're often women. No, one of the things about abuse victims is they can be almost anyone. And I've heard so many strong, intelligent, educated women say, I didn't think this could happen to me. So it's not, these aren't masochistic women. These aren't women who are looking for pain. Many of them have had abuse in their childhoods, but many of them haven't. Unfortunately, there are enough men who believe they need to control out there that women meet them. You know, it's just in the course of dating, and they're not all, they don't always present as dangerous initially, but sometimes they do.
Can we talk a little bit about violence to children and children
Yes.
that are abused in their families? And I think one of the first things that comes into my mind is this question: a child that is abused will become an abuser?
No.
No.
That's a mythology. When we go backwards and we look at people who are abusing, chances are they were abused as children. But if you go forwards and try and project forwards, people who are abused do not necessarily become abusers. And it's really important for people to realize that, because a lot of people become really frightened of that. I've been consulted by many people who were not abusing, but they were frightened that they could. And this is particularly true of sexual abuse, and particularly true of men who have been sexually abused. So the fear is that they could become an abuser. The statistics are you will not. Most people are horrified by what's happened to them and determined not to raise their families that way.
Can we think about some consequences of abuse if it happens in early childhood or maybe in adolescence?
Oh, there's so many. The myth that children aren't affected by abuse is extraordinary, and the thing that there's been a number of revelations in research that have really changed the way we look at it. We used to believe, for example, that if there was family violence just between the husband and wife, the children weren't affected. But research shows that they are as affected as if they were abused directly. So they develop the same mental health problems later on. It impacts on their developing neurology in the same way. And in some instances, witnessing abuse can actually have a greater impact on you than being abused. So, because it creates an atmosphere of fear and tension. And even though you know the person hasn't abused you, you know they could. And that itself is pretty scary, particularly if it's someone you love. And so what tends to happen is the impacts, I always call abuse the gift that keeps taking, because all across your life, people are living out the implications of things that happened to them early on. So an interesting example in the literature that's often cited is it was a 73-year-old woman, an American woman, who was suffering the complications of diabetes and had a lot of very, very serious and expensive health problems. But they traced it back to the fact that she was obese. And they traced her obesity back to the fact that she'd been sexually assaulted as a child. And she only felt safe being unattractive. And so she lived her life as obese. So she first had that to deal with. And then, of course, all these other health problems came in on top. So in terms of the statistics are extraordinary. If you have abuse in your background, you are 2,500 times more likely to inject drugs, illegal drugs like heroin. You are 1,000 times more likely to attempt suicide. You are a couple of hundred times more likely to have heart problems, to develop cancers. Anything that you can pretty much imagine. It's just extraordinary. And we're now even thinking that there are links to dementia and childhood abuse, because the chemicals that are released when you are living in atmospheres of fear actually affect the areas of the brain where dementia develops, the hippocampus, for example. So it just keeps taking. The message to the viewers is don't abuse your children.
For sure.
For sure.
Okay, so can we tell us a little bit about some interventions and some programs that you work in or with, because
Yes.
I think we need some specialists to tell us more about it.
Well, firstly, there's a lot we can all do. We can create places of safety for children. So one of the things would be to look at the way, do children, for example, when they go to school, do they feel safer or less safe? And with bullying and things like that in school, many children feel less safe. So that's a place to begin. We could start talking about it as a community. This shouldn't be up to counselors to resolve. This is a community problem. In fact, it's probably one of the most serious health problems facing the Western world at the moment. And as a result of that, we really need to come to grips with it. It costs, in Australia, we spend about $13 billion a year on the impact of domestic violence alone, not including child abuse. And I think the figures for Canada are almost exactly the same. So this is costly to the community in every way it can be. Plus, of course, we have a group of abused, angry children who are out there going to school with our children, and so our children start paying the consequences. We pay the consequences to live in communities where there's drug abuse and where all these other things happen. So it's really expensive. So the first thing I would say is we need not just specialist programs, but we need generalist programs. We need people to talk about it in society. We need to be thinking about what we can do. We need shelters where women can go to for safety. We need programs to work with the perpetrators, male and female. We need programs that can help the children as well overcome the issues of child abuse.
Programs that are delivered in the community.
In the community, in specialist centers, in schools, in general ways. We need education on relationships, particularly in high school, as people come into their first relationships, to say what is healthy and what's not healthy. Most people get this information from the internet, and what they're downloading, particularly boys, is often not just pornography, but quite kinky pornography, and they're thinking this is what women want. And in kinky pornography, women are being abused. That's what the pornography is about. And so boys come to the conclusion that this is what they should be doing with their girlfriends. And a lot of times the girl in her first relationship doesn't feel okay about saying, no, that's not what I want. So we need to train girls to speak clearly. We need to empower girls to say, you know, no, this is not you're not treating me properly. These sorts of things. And we need to train boys. I've seen now a generation of boys who also don't know what it means to be treated properly in a relationship. So all of those things.
I think speaking about it first, it will be of great help.
Yes, speaking about it, you almost have to do first. We have tended to sequester all of these problems to a person and their counselor. And so it's too much for two people to bear. It's like building a building on two pillars. You can't. Society, as a counselor, I need society support, and I need help. I can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. We all need a whole group of people who are starting to think about multiple sorts of interventions and solutions.
So we have only 1 minute left.
Oh.
I would like for you to, I know, I think it's a hard one, but I would like for you to send a message regarding family abuse and our need to raise awareness regarding
Well, the message is really simple. Families work when every member in the family is treated with love and respect. And if we are not doing that for whatever reasons, we are creating risk for the future. Risk for our children, risk for ourselves, risk for our society. If we can shift back to being respectful and loving with the people that we should be respecting and loving, then that is really the first step, and maybe in some ways the only step that we need to address family violence.
Ron, thank you very much for
It's been a pleasure.
Information. Thank you. Tematica de azi este, așa cum am menționat și la început, una extrem de sensibilă. Suntem în continuare o societate în care violența domestică există la cote mai mari decât cu certitudine studiile ar putea să o arate, acesta fiind un subiect pe care nu avem voie să îl discutăm. Există câteva persoane care au vorbit public despre acest lucru și despre impactul violenței domestice, iar una dintre acestea a fost o invitată a noastră, Eleonora Pocola, căreia vrem să-i mulțumim pentru acest demers. Însă avem nevoie să fie cât mai multe astfel de voci. Până la ediția viitoare, vă doresc o săptămână cât mai ușoară. Numai bine!